So Tony Burke opened the batting on this censure motion, but after Morrison spoke and questioned the intent of it in the government, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese felt he had to speak to it and justify why it was important.
A censure motion like this is as rare as it is grave, but to ignore it would be to be complicit in saying, well, that was okay. This was not a one-man show. This was the Australian people who stood up and protected themselves, not just in the parliament, those people who stayed at home, people who got vaccinated, the heroes of the pandemic who went out there and worked with people who were sick. So all this unctuousness and self-congratulation we heard this morning should be dismissed. He just doesn't get it, the former Prime Minister. He said this morning he'd had conversations privately with my colleagues. It's not about Josh Frydenberg.
That's right.
It's about the people of Australia. That's who we're accountable to.
Now, not all of the Liberal Party were with Scott Morrison today, were they?
No, Bridget Archer was the one Liberal to cross the floor. Although I noticed Karen Andrews, who was angry at Scott Morrison for secretly taking on the Home Affairs portfolio without her knowing when she was Minister, abstained from voting. Bridget Archer said she did not accept Scott Morrison's explanation or apologies.
A move to ensure direct power was quietly held over a number of portfolios, unbeknownst to our own party, our own ministers and to the Australian public, was entirely unnecessary. It is an affront to our democratic Westminster system, which has functioned for well over 120 years. I do not accept any of the explanations put forward by the former Prime Minister for his actions, and I'm deeply disappointed by the lack of genuine apology.
I thought Scott Morrison gave quite a forceful account of his government's performance and so on, and he's a former Prime Minister, of course. He knows how to carry himself, but the fundamental flaw in the argument continues to be why.
Absolutely, and it brought me back to the only press conference Scott Morrison has had on this, on the secret ministries in Sydney, where again he did not really explain why. Why did you deceive the Australian public and your Treasurer and Finance Minister about this?
Well, I don't share that view. I didn't inform them. Had I been in the situation, Andrew, where those powers had to be used, then I believe that was the time to have that conversation, because that's when the powers would be enacted.
All right. I guess we'll never know. There was this exchange as well.
Did the Prime Minister exercise any powers that intervene with the operations of any minister? No, except bar the one circumstance, which we've been very clear about. There were no other circumstances. Did the Prime Minister take any additional payment for any of these things? Of course not.
Did the Prime Minister deceive his colleagues? Yes.
The Prime Minister, and to the extent that I've caused offence to my colleagues.
Mr. Morrison.
No, I didn't disclose it to them.
You deceived your colleagues.
I didn't disclose it to them because I didn't think it was in the interest of the best operations of the government during a crisis.
All right. Well, there's no doubt that what Scott Morrison did on taking on secret ministries, not telling his colleagues, not telling the public, was unacceptable, devious, contemptuous of his Cabinet, Parliament and colleagues, and everyone seems glad the government will legislate so it will not happen again. Even Scott Morrison approves of that. But there will be debate on whether we needed this censure motion or whether the government even needed it politically. I don't think you would have seen Hawke or Keating or Howard move such a censure motion. Anyway, that's just my view. From the opposition's point of view, if you don't show that sort of loyalty to your former PM by voting against the motion, regardless of what you think of his actions, what's the point? Particularly when he hasn't dumped on his party like Malcolm Turnbull has since he left the nation's top office.